The Vampire King's son lost control in the middle of the town's square during the spring market. Everyone ran, everyone except the beggar girl, with nothing left to lose. What she didn't realize, she was the only person who could calm the beast inside him, and the desperate king watching from the castle walls would shatter every tradition to keep her at his son's side. The spring market had been beautiful that morning. Silk ribbons fluttered from vendor stalls like colorful butterflies. The air smelled of fresh bread, lavender soap, and roasted chestnuts. Ruby Bennett moved through the crowd like a shadow, her torn dress blending with the cobblestones, her empty stomach a familiar ache. 2 years, living on these streets, and she'd learned the art of being invisible. Stay near the food carts. Keep your head down. Don't let them see the hunger in your eyes. A scream shattered the marketplace peace. Ruby's head snapped up. Through the suddenly scattering crowd, she saw him, Grayson Corvus. The Vampire King's son stood in the center of the square, and he was beautiful in the way a storm is beautiful, terrifying and impossible to look away from. His crimson eyes blazed with bloodlust. Dark veins spiderwebbed across his pale skin like cracks in porcelain. His fangs were fully extended, and his hands, trembling at his sides, ended in claws that had torn through his fine leather gloves. But it wasn't the monster that made Ruby freeze. It was the boy underneath. Mothers grabbed children and ran. Merchants abandoned their carts, silk and silver scattering across the cobblestones. Royal guards backed away, their hands on sword hilts they knew were useless against a vampire prince. The circle around Grayson widened with each passing second, a ring of terror expanding outward like ripples in water. Ruby should have run too. Every survival instinct screamed at her to disappear into the alleys, to fade back into the shadows where she belonged. But she'd seen that look before, in the mirror, in the eyes of other forgotten souls. That wasn't rage in his crimson eyes. It was fear. He was fighting himself, every muscle locked in terrible control, shaking with the effort of holding back the beast. He was losing. Ruby took a step forward, then another. The crowd noticed. Gasps rippled through the remaining onlookers pressed against building walls. Someone shouted a warning, but Ruby's bare feet kept moving across the cold cobblestones, through the abandoned market stalls, over crushed flowers and dropped parcels. Time seemed to slow. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud as thunder in her ears. She could see Grayson's chest, heaving with each ragged breath. Crimson tears leaked from his eyes, mixing with the dark veins on his cheeks. His lips moved, forming words no one could hear. "Stay back, please. I can't. Ruby stopped 3 feet away. The entire square had gone silent. 200 people held their breath as one. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself waited to see what would happen when a beggar girl stepped within killing distance of a vampire in bloodlust. She didn't kneel in deference. She knelt to be at eye level, to see him not as a prince or a monster, but as someone drowning who needed an anchor. "It's okay," Ruby whispered, her voice cutting through the terrible silence. "I'm not afraid of you." Grayson's crimson eyes locked onto hers. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then his trembling hand, clawed and deadly, reached toward her face. The crowd gasped. Guards started forward. But Ruby didn't flinch. The iron chains were heavier than Ruby expected. They bit into her wrists as the guards dragged her through corridors of black stone and flickering torchlight. Bloodstone Castle. She'd only ever seen it from a distance, a dark crown on the mountain that loomed over Ravenhollow like a constant reminder of who truly ruled this kingdom. She was going to die here. The thought should have terrified her, but Ruby felt strangely calm. She'd survived 2 years on the streets after watching vampires kill her family. Every day since had been borrowed time anyway. At least this death would be quick. Probably. The throne room doors opened with a groan that echoed like a death knell. Ruby's bare feet stumbled on marble so polished it reflected the vaulted ceiling above. And there, seated on a throne of twisted iron and ancient wood, sat King Damien Corvus. He looked exactly like the stories described. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples. His eyes were the color of winter storms, cold and assessing. He wore no crown, but power radiated from him like heat from a forge. This was a man who'd ruled for 3 centuries, who'd seen empires rise and fall, who could end her life with a gesture. "The beggar who touched my son." Damien's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. "Tell me how you're still breathing." Ruby lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite every instinct screaming to look away. "I don't know, Your Majesty. You don't know." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. A human girl walks up to a vampire in bloodlust, touches him, and somehow survives. Yet you claim ignorance. "I didn't do anything special. I just talked to him." "People don't talk to rabid animals, girl. They run." His eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you run?" The question hung in the air. Ruby thought of Grayson's crimson tears, the way his whole body shook, trying to fight the monster inside. Because he wasn't an animal, he was scared. Something flickered across Damien's face, gone too quickly to name. Before he could respond, a side door opened. Grayson entered, flanked by guards, his eyes now their normal dark blue. He looked small in the massive throne room, younger than he had in the square. When he saw Ruby in chains, he stopped dead. "Father, no, she didn't." Silence. Damien raised a hand, but his tone softened fractionally. "Son, tell me what happened when she approached you." Grayson's jaw worked. "The red was everywhere. I couldn't think, couldn't see. I was going to kill someone. I knew it. But then she—" He looked at Ruby, something like wonder in his eyes. "She made it go away. I don't know how, but the red just faded." The throne room fell silent. Ruby could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of impossible attention. King Damien stood slowly, descending the steps until he stood directly before her. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the desperate hope he tried to hide. "I'm told you have nowhere to go, no family, no home." His voice was quiet now, meant only for her. "Stay. Help my son control what I cannot." Ruby's chains suddenly felt very light. "Your Majesty, I'm just a—" "You're his anchor. That makes you invaluable." The servants' quarters were small but clean, with a real bed and a window that overlooked the eastern gardens. The chambermaid had left clothing on the bed, a simple grey dress, softer than anything Ruby had worn in years, and shoes that actually fit. After 2 years of sleeping in doorways and alleys, the room felt impossibly large. Ruby couldn't sleep. Every creak of the castle made her tense, expecting guards to arrive and tell her the king had changed his mind. Finally, near midnight, she gave up and slipped out into the corridor. The castle was a maze of stone and shadow, but she followed the scent of night-blooming jasmine until she found herself in a garden bathed in moonlight. Grayson sat on a stone bench beside a fountain, staring at the water. He'd changed from his formal clothes into a simple dark shirt and trousers. Without the finery, he looked even younger, more human. He glanced up as she approached, surprise flashing across his face. "I couldn't sleep either," Ruby said quietly. He nodded, making room on the bench. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the fountain's gentle splash. Finally, Grayson spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. For what happened in the square. For what you had to see. You didn't hurt anyone. But I could have. I would have. If you hadn't—" He looked down at his hands, turning them over, as if searching for claws that were no longer there. "I'm a monster." Ruby thought of the crimson tears on his cheeks, the way he'd begged people to stay back, even as the bloodlust consumed him. Monsters don't fight themselves. Monsters don't cry. He met her eyes, searching for mockery and finding none. "Why did you do it? Walk toward me like that?" Ruby wrapped her arms around herself, the night air suddenly cold. 3 years ago, vampires attacked my village. I was 16. I watched them kill my parents, my little brother. I hid in a cellar and listened to them scream. She paused, the old pain sharp as fresh glass. For 2 years after that, I thought all vampires were the same. Monsters without souls. But today, I saw you fighting so hard not to be one. I thought, maybe I was wrong. Grayson's expression crumbled. Without a word, he stood and held out his hand. Ruby took it, letting him lead her deeper into the garden to a section overgrown with roses, white ones that glowed silver in the moonlight. "My mother's garden," he said softly. "She died when I was 10. Childbirth, trying to give my father another heir. This is the only place where I don't feel the bloodlust as strongly, where I can remember being just a boy, before everything went wrong." Ruby squeezed his hand. 2 broken souls, standing in a dead woman's garden, finding the first threads of understanding. "Then we'll come here. Whenever the red starts coming back, we'll come here together." Grayson looked at her with something like hope dawning in his dark blue eyes. "Together?" "Together," Ruby promised. The castle physician was an ancient vampire named Dr. Kieran Shaw, with spectacles perched on his nose and ink stains on his fingers. He studied Ruby with undisguised skepticism when she appeared in his chambers the next morning. "The king sent you to learn about bloodlust?" He set down his quill. "Most humans faint at the details." "I won't faint," Ruby said firmly. Dr. Shaw sighed and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "All young vampires struggle with bloodlust from their transformation until roughly their 21st year. It's like puberty for your kind. Hormonal, unpredictable, manageable, with proper training." He paused, his expression darkening. "But Prince Grayson's episodes are different, more violent, more frequent. I've never seen a case this severe." Ruby leaned forward. "Why?" "I don't know. Perhaps the trauma of losing his mother. Perhaps something in his bloodline. Perhaps he simply feels too deeply." Dr. Shaw closed the journal. "What I do know is that traditional methods haven't worked. Meditation, isolation, blood rationing, all failures. Until you." Ruby left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. If she was going to help Grayson, she needed to understand what triggered the episodes. She started keeping a journal, noting everything. Day 3. Loud argument in the council chamber, above Grayson's study. Crimson flecks appeared in his eyes within minutes. We went to the garden. It helped. Day 5. Training yard exercises with clashing swords. He had to leave. Covered his ears. Said the noise felt like needles in his skull. Day 8. His father asked why he missed morning lessons, the disappointment in Damien's voice. Grayson's hands started shaking, couldn't speak for an hour afterward. They began developing signals. A hand on the heart meant the bloodlust was rising. Fingers tapped twice meant he needed to leave immediately. A deep breath released slowly meant he was fighting to stay in control. Ruby started carrying a small vial of lavender oil from the Queen's garden. When Grayson's eyes began shifting crimson, she'd let him smell it, grounding him in the memory of his mother, of safety, of something beyond the hunger. 2 weeks in, they were in the library when a servant dropped a tray in the hallway. The crash echoed like thunder. Grayson's eyes blazed red, his fangs extending before he could stop them. Ruby moved instantly, stepping into his line of sight, holding up 2 fingers. Their signal. Breathe. She watched him war with himself, watched the veins darken on his skin, watched his clawed hands grip the table edge hard enough to crack wood. But he held her gaze. 2 breaths. 5. 10. The crimson faded slowly back to blue. Grayson slumped in his chair, exhausted. "How did you know that would work?" Ruby smiled, making a note in her journal. "I didn't. But now we do." She looked up at him. "We're learning, Grayson. Together. And every time you fight it, you get stronger." For the first time since she'd met him, Grayson smiled back. Not a full smile, but real. Hopeful. "Together," he echoed. 3 weeks into her stay at Bloodstone Castle, Grayson appeared at Ruby's door just after dawn. "There's something I want to show you," he said, voice uncertain. "If you'll come." She followed him through corridors she'd never seen, up spiral stairs thick with dust, until they reached a tower that seemed forgotten by time itself. Grayson produced a key from his pocket and unlocked the heavy wooden door. The room inside stole Ruby's breath. Paintings covered every surface, canvases stacked against walls, some hanging on nails, others spread across the floor. The morning light streaming through the tall windows illuminated a gallery of beautiful horror. Here, a boy with crimson eyes stood at the edge of a cliff, half his face human, half monster. There, an angel and a demon locked in embrace, impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Everywhere Ruby looked, she saw the same theme: darkness and light at war with each other. "I've never shown anyone," Grayson said quietly, staying near the door as if ready to flee. "Not even my father. I come here when the red gets too loud, when I need to." He gestured helplessly at the canvases. "Get it out somehow." Ruby moved deeper into the room, studying each piece. Some were violent, all sharp lines and angry slashes of crimson and black. Others were heartbreakingly gentle, soft blues and silvers depicting a woman with kind eyes who could only be his mother. But the largest canvas, the one on the easel by the window, was unfinished. It showed a boy reaching toward light, half his body still trapped in shadow, his hand outstretched but not quite touching the brightness. "This one," Ruby said softly. "Is this you?" Grayson came to stand beside her. "I don't know if I'll ever reach it. The light. Sometimes I think the darkness is all I'll ever be." Ruby studied the painting, seeing what he couldn't. The determination in the boy's posture, the way his fingers stretched toward hope, even as shadows clung to him. The fact that he kept reaching at all. "Grayson, look at these. Really look at them." She gestured around the room. "You paint monsters, yes, but you also paint the fight against them. Every canvas here is proof that you haven't given up. I hurt people. I could kill. But you don't." Ruby turned to face him fully. "You fight every single day. You develop signals. You practice breathing. You run to the garden when you feel it coming. Most people don't fight their demons. They surrender to them. You're not broken, Grayson. You're just fighting harder than anyone knows. His eyes glistened, and for a moment, Ruby thought he might cry. Instead, he picked up a brush, dipped it in silver paint, and added a single stroke to the unfinished canvas, the boy's fingertips just barely touching the light. "Stay," he whispered, "while I paint. Please." Ruby settled onto the floor among the canvases, and Grayson painted while dawn turned to day. In that forgotten tower, surrounded by his beautiful broken art, their bond shifted into something deeper than friendship, something like understanding, like family. King Damien Corvus had not meant to spy on his own son. He'd been crossing the eastern courtyard when he heard laughter, a sound so foreign in these halls that he stopped mid-stride. From the shadowed colonnade, he watched Ruby and Grayson in the garden. They sat cross-legged on the grass, and Ruby held up fingers in various combinations, while Grayson tried to guess their meanings. One finger, mild discomfort. 2, need to leave. 3, emergency. But she'd added new ones. 4 fingers, doing well. 5, proud of you. When Grayson correctly identified all 5 signals, Ruby grinned and held up both hands, all 10 fingers spread wide. Grayson tilted his head, confused. "What's that one?" "That's the 'You're amazing and I believe in you' signal," Ruby said. Grayson laughed. Actually laughed. The sound, bright and unguarded. "That's not a real signal." "It is now." Ruby held up 10 fingers again, wiggling them. "See? Official." Damien felt something crack inside his chest. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his son laugh. Years, certainly. Perhaps not since his mother died. He'd tried everything. The finest tutors, the most skilled physicians, strict discipline, gentle patience. Nothing worked. The episodes only grew worse, and the distance between them widened into a chasm neither knew how to cross. Yet here was a beggar girl with no training, no status, no power, and she'd accomplished in a month what he couldn't in a decade. That night, Damien found himself outside Ruby's door. He knocked softly, and she opened it wearing a nightdress, her red-brown hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Your Majesty, may I come in?" It came out more plea than command. Ruby stepped aside, and Damien entered the modest room. He felt enormous here, a king in a servant's quarters, but he suddenly didn't care about protocol. "How do you do it?" The words escaped before he could stop them. "I've tried everything, given him every advantage, every resource, yet you succeed where I fail." "How?" Ruby studied him with those steady eyes that held far too much understanding for someone so young. "May I speak freely, Your Majesty?" "Please. You see the prince, who must be perfect. The heir who must be controlled. The vampire who must never show weakness." She paused. "I see him, Your Majesty. Not the prince, not the vampire, just him. A boy who's scared and fighting and doing his best." The words landed like physical blows. Damien sank into the single chair, suddenly exhausted. "I thought I was protecting him, preparing him. Every lesson, every rule, I thought I was making him stronger." "You were teaching him that who he is isn't enough," Ruby said gently, "that he needs to be fixed." Damien closed his eyes. 3 centuries of life and a 19-year-old beggar had to teach him how to be a father. "I don't know how to undo that." "Start by telling him he doesn't need to be fixed, that you love him as he is." "And if I don't know how?" Ruby's voice softened. "Then learn. together. That's what he and I are doing. Damien looked up at her, this impossible girl who'd walked toward death and found his son instead. Thank you, he whispered, for seeing him when I was too blind. The council chamber was carved from black obsidian, cold and imposing. Lady Morgana Vex sat at the head of the crescent table, her silver hair pulled back severely, her eyes like chips of ice. She was ancient, one of the first vampires turned during the Dark Age, and she commanded respect through sheer age and political cunning. The human stays, she said, her voice echoing off stone walls. This is unacceptable. Around the table, the 5 other council members murmured agreement. Lord Thaddeus, Master of Arms, Lady Seraphina, Keeper of Bloodlines, Count Aldrich, Voice of the Old Ways. Each of them wore expressions ranging from disgust to concern. The girl has witnessed the heir's weakness, Morgana continued. She could use this knowledge against us, against the crown. She saved him, Damien said coldly from where he stood at the foot of the table. Kings did not sit during council interrogations. Or have you forgotten that detail? Saved him from what, Your Majesty? From his own nature? Lady Seraphina leaned forward. This is precisely the problem. She's teaching the prince that his vampire nature is something to be controlled, suppressed, managed like a disease. She's corrupting pure bloodlines with human sentimentality. She's keeping him alive, Damien countered. For now, Count Aldrich interjected, but what happens when she fails, when the boy loses control and kills her? We'll have a diplomatic crisis. Worse, we'll have an heir so broken by guilt he'll be useless to the throne. Morgana stood, her black gown flowing like shadow. The blood moon ceremony is in 2 weeks. Every vampire of standing will attend. Every eye will be on Prince Grayson. The ceremony is sacred, a test of control for young vampires. If he fails, and with his history he will fail, it will humiliate the crown and cast doubt on the succession. Then he won't fail, Damien said. You cannot guarantee that, Your Majesty. Morgana's smile was thin and sharp, which is why we propose a solution. Remove the human before the ceremony, quietly. A fall from the tower, a fever. These things happen. Without her influence, the prince can be properly trained by those who understand vampire nature. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Damien's eyes flashed with barely contained rage. You speak of murdering a girl under my protection. We speak of protecting the realm, Lord Thaddeus said carefully, from weakness, from sentiment, from the chaos that comes when humans interfere in vampire affairs. The council demands it, Morgana said, her voice formal now, invoking ancient law. For the good of the kingdom, the human must be removed before the blood moon. We call for a vote. 5 hands rose around the table. Only one remained down. Lord Cassius, the youngest council member, who looked uncomfortable but stayed silent. Damien looked at each of them, his expression carved from stone. I am still king, and I refuse. The silence that followed was absolute. Your Majesty, Morgana said softly, dangerously, you risk everything for one human girl. Your reputation, your son's future, the stability of your rule. Are you certain this is wise? I'm certain that my son is finally healing, and I will not destroy that. Ruby Bennett stays. Morgana's smile turned predatory. Then let the blood moon ceremony be the judge. If the prince fails, both he and the girl face consequences. Agreed? Damien knew a trap when he saw one, but with the council united against him, he had no choice. Agreed. The summons came at dawn. Ruby was brought before the council with Grayson at her side, their hands clasped tight enough to hurt. Lady Morgana spoke with the cold precision of a judge delivering sentence. The blood moon ceremony will take place in 5 days. Prince Grayson must demonstrate perfect control before the assembled court. No episodes, no crimson eyes, no loss of composure. She turned her icy gaze on Ruby. If he fails, he will be deemed unfit for succession, and you, human, will be charged with witchcraft for corrupting the air with unnatural influence. The penalty for both is death. Ruby felt Grayson's hands start to tremble. She squeezed harder, keeping her voice steady. He won't fail. We shall see, Morgana said, with a thin smile. The next 5 days blurred into desperate preparation. They practiced in the garden at dawn, in the tower at midday, in the library at midnight. Ruby pushed Grayson harder than ever, simulating triggers, loud noises, crowded spaces. She even asked guards to argue nearby, recreating the chaos that normally sent his control spiraling. But the pressure was a weight crushing down on them both. Ruby saw it in the shadows under Grayson's eyes, in the way his hands shook even when calm. He was terrified, not of death, but of failing her. Again, Ruby said on the 4th night, clapping her hands sharply near his ear. Grayson flinched, crimson flickering in his eyes. Ruby, I can't. Again, she clapped louder. The red spread. His breathing quickened. Again, something snapped. Grayson's eyes blazed fully crimson, veins erupting across his skin like black lightning. His fangs extended with an audible click, and a growl ripped from his throat that made Ruby's blood freeze. He lunged, faster than she'd ever seen him move, slamming her against the tower wall, his clawed hand wrapped around her throat, not squeezing yet, but the threat was clear. This was different, worse. He wasn't fighting it anymore. He was gone. Grayson, Ruby gasped, her pulse thundering against his palm. Grayson, look at me. Nothing. Just that terrible crimson stare. Ruby did the only thing she could think of. She stopped fighting, let her body go limp, and whispered the words she'd never said aloud. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you, and I'm not afraid. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then Grayson's eyes widened. The crimson flickered, fighting with blue. His hand loosened fractionally. Ruby reached up slowly, carefully, and touched his face. Come back to me, she whispered. Please, come back. The red drained away so suddenly that Grayson collapsed, taking them both to the floor. He buried his face in her shoulder, shaking violently. I almost killed you. I almost... But you didn't. Ruby held him tight, her own hands trembling now. You came back. You always come back. But they both knew the truth. The blood moon ceremony would be even worse. And next time, coming back might not be enough. The night before the blood moon ceremony, Grayson found Ruby in the Queen's garden. She sat among the white roses, moonlight turning her hair to copper fire. When she looked up at him, he saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. You need to leave, he said, without preamble. Tonight. I'll give you money, horses, whatever you need. Go south to the harbor cities where vampires have no power. Start over. Ruby stood slowly. No. Ruby, please. You don't understand. The blood moon amplifies bloodlust tenfold. Every vampire in the kingdom will feel it. But for me, his voice cracked. I'll lose control. I know I will. And when I do, you'll be standing right there. I can't watch you die because of me. Then don't watch. Ruby crossed the distance between them. Close your eyes. Hold my hand. Let me anchor you like I always do. It won't be enough this time. You don't know that. I almost killed you 3 nights ago. The words exploded from him, raw and desperate. My hand was around your throat, and I wanted to squeeze. Part of me wanted it, Ruby. Don't you understand? The monster inside me wants to destroy everything I love, and you. He turned away, unable to finish. I'm not leaving. Ruby's voice was iron wrapped in silk. Do you know what my life was before you? I woke up every morning wondering if this was the day I'd starve, or freeze, or get beaten to death in an alley. I was invisible. Nobody. Nothing. She grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to face her. You walked into my life when I had nothing. You gave me purpose. A home. You made me matter. I'm not leaving. You could die. Then I die protecting someone I love. There are worse ways to go. The words hung between them like a confession. Grayson pulled her into his arms, holding her like she might disappear. I don't deserve you. Good thing that's not your choice to make. They stood that way for a long moment, two souls clinging to each other on the edge of darkness. Neither heard King Damien approach until he spoke from the garden entrance. May I join you? Grayson tensed, but Ruby squeezed his hand. Damien walked forward slowly, and in the moonlight, he looked older, more human, vulnerable. I came to tell you something I should have said years ago. Damien stopped before his son, and his voice roughened with emotion. I'm proud of you, Grayson, not because you're strong or controlled or perfect. I'm proud because you let her in, because you keep fighting when it would be easier to give up, because despite everything, you still have hope. Grayson's eyes filled with tears. Father, Damien pulled his son into an embrace, something he hadn't done since Grayson was small. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together, all three of us, as family. Ruby felt tears stream down her own cheeks as she watched father and son hold each other. Tomorrow might bring death or triumph, but tonight, in this garden of ghosts and roses, they had each other, and that would have to be enough. The grand courtyard of Bloodstone Castle had never held so many. Vampires filled the northern section, their pale faces turned toward the sky. Humans crowded the southern half, kept separate by ancient tradition and an invisible line of fear. In the center, on a raised dais, stood Grayson Corvus with his father beside him and Ruby one step behind. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky, massive and crimson. Ruby felt the change immediately. Every vampire in the courtyard tensed, their eyes flickering with red. Grayson's breathing quickened, his hands clenching into fists, but he held steady, using every technique they'd practiced. Lady Morgana approached the dais, carrying a ceremonial goblet of wine. To the prince's control, she announced, her voice carrying across the courtyard. May he prove himself worthy. Ruby's instincts screamed a warning, but it was too late. Grayson took the goblet, brought it to his lips, and drank. His eyes went wide. Ruby smelled it then. Not wine, human blood. Pure, fresh, intoxicating. Grayson's goblet hit the stone with a crash. His eyes blazed crimson, veins erupting across his skin like black fire. The crowd gasped, humans backing away, vampires watching with predatory intensity. Grayson doubled over, a sound between a growl and a scream tearing from his throat. He's lost, someone shouted. The prince has failed. Panic rippled through the humans. People pushed toward exits. Guards drew weapons. On the dais, Damien reached for his son, but Grayson lashed out, claws extended, barely missing his father's throat. Ruby didn't think. She moved. The crowd blurred around her as she walked forward, just like she had in the town square 2 months ago. A beggar girl with nothing to lose, walking toward death. Guards shouted for her to stop. She heard Damien's voice, urgent and commanding. But the words didn't matter. She climbed the dais steps and stood before Grayson. His crimson eyes locked onto her, feral and unfocused. His fangs were fully extended, and she could see his body trembling with barely contained violence. "Grayson," she said softly, reaching up to take his face in her hands. "Look at me. See me." He growled, but she didn't let go. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered, echoing the words that started everything. "Come back to me, please." For an agonizing heartbeat, nothing changed. Then Grayson's clawed hands came up, not to attack, but to cover hers. The crimson in his eyes flickered. Once, twice. Blue fought through the red like dawn breaking through night. When he finally spoke, his voice carried across the silent courtyard. "She is my anchor, my choice, my future." Then Grayson did something that made the entire assembly gasp. He tilted his head back, baring his throat to Ruby, the ultimate gesture of trust in vampire culture, offering his life to a human. The crowd erupted in shock, but Ruby barely heard it. She looked past Grayson to where Damien stood, tears streaming down the ancient king's face. He stepped forward and placed his hand over both of theirs. "Family," Damien declared, his voice ringing with authority. "By blood or by choice, she is ours." The blood moon shone overhead, but its light no longer seemed threatening. In its crimson glow, a new future was born. 6 weeks after the blood moon ceremony, Ruby Bennett stood in what was now called the Bridge Garden, teaching a circle of children how to breathe through fear. 5 human children sat beside 3 young vampires, all of them practicing the techniques she'd developed with Grayson. "When you feel the scary feeling coming," Ruby said gently, "you stop, you breathe, you remember you're not alone." She demonstrated, and 10 small faces mimicked her, their breath misting in the cool morning air. One of the vampire children, a girl no older than 8, raised her hand. "Does it work for everyone, even if we're different?" Ruby smiled. "Especially if we're different. That's when we need it most." She wore a deep blue dress now, finer than anything she'd owned as a beggar, but simpler than court fashion. Damien had offered her titles, lands, wealth. She'd refused everything except one thing: the freedom to help others like Grayson. The council had protested, of course, but their power had diminished significantly after Lady Morgana was exiled for poisoning the prince. From the balcony above, King Damien watched his son address a crowd in the courtyard. Vampires and humans stood together now, the invisible line between them finally beginning to fade. Grayson spoke confidently about the new initiatives: mixed schools, shared councils, protection laws for humans in vampire territories. And beside him, always, stood Ruby. Not behind him like a servant, not below him on the steps, but beside him as an equal. Damien felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: peace. His son was whole, his kingdom was healing, and he'd learned that strength came not from control, but from connection. That evening, Ruby found Grayson in the old tower, their sanctuary. Canvases still lined the walls, but new paintings had joined the old ones, brighter ones, hopeful ones. The unfinished painting of the boy reaching for light had been completed weeks ago. The boy's hand finally touching the brightness, his shadow not gone, but integrated, part of who he was, rather than something to fight. "I started something new," Grayson said, gesturing to a fresh canvas on the easel. "Thought you might help me finish it." Ruby looked at the sketch he'd begun. Two hands clasped together, one pale with the faint trace of veins, one warm with sun-kissed skin. Above them, a moon, not crimson with bloodlust, but silver with possibility. "It's perfect," she whispered. They painted together as the sun set, adding details and color. Not monsters or angels, not darkness or light, kept separate, but two souls intertwined. When they finished, Grayson signed it in the corner. Ruby and Grayson, the bridge. Later, standing at the tower window looking over the kingdom, Ruby leaned into Grayson's shoulder. Lights twinkled in both the vampire quarter and the human district, no longer separated by fear, but connected by fragile, growing trust. "Do you ever miss it?" Grayson asked quietly. "Being invisible? Having no responsibilities?" Ruby thought of the girl she'd been, hungry, alone, invisible. Then she looked at the boy beside her, the family she'd found, the purpose she'd discovered. "Not for a second," she said, and meant it.